It's a tough moment for Tottenham, but I think we have the right qualities to come out from this moment.
And still Ricky Villa! What a fantastic run! He scored!
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, it's there!
Here's Lucas Moura! Oh, they've done it! The wait for silverware is over!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. I'm Marcus Buckland, sweltering, I have to say, in central London. Tough to sleep at the moment, although it was quite easy to fall asleep watching England against Ghana last night. I'm in the company of George Sessions from the Press Association, of course, the two Toms, Barkley and Allnut from The Sun and The Times, respectively, are still in the United States. Tom B was certainly at the game last night. Tom A's been here, there and everywhere. And actually, they both collated some fantastic content during their travels. They did attempt to record a podcast for us a couple of nights ago. At least they claimed to have done that, and then said that the Wi-Fi wasn't good enough. I reckon the beers in the bar were preferable. But we will, I promise, hear from the Toms sooner rather than later. But George has all the latest information. I mean, so many things, George, continue to happen. Before we go into details, just a word about the game last night. And from a Tottenham point of view, the fact that Jed Spence started actually created some headlines before the game, because it certainly appears as though he was the only England player not to shake hands with Thomas Partey. And he's actually received a lot of plaudits as a result of that. The game itself, probably not one he'll remember with great fondness, but I don't suppose too many England players will look back on that 90 minutes with too much fondness.
It's just what we do, Marcus. We draw the second game at a major tournament. We reminded, weren't we, last night that we've done it 4 times now, and 2 of those times we've made finals. So it's not a bad little bit of history to hopefully follow. It made me laugh, the Jed Spence incident, in the sense that I said on the last pod, I don't know if you remember, that I feel like Jed Spence will have a moment at this World Cup, and I don't know when it will be. And I didn't really mean that he would have a moment where he made the headlines like that, but maybe that is his moment where he's, to certainly some England fans, a bit of a national treasure for ignoring Thomas Partey, given everything that's in the background with him over the last few years. But no, not a great game. And our Sir Harry missed a very, very good chance at the end, didn't he? So he's human after all. But England are in a pretty good position, aren't they? Still top of the group, 4 points, beat Panama, which you'd absolutely expect them to do so, and then they'll finish top. I did see the knockout phase is constantly changing, but it seemed like it was maybe a Mexico or Scotland in the round of 32, if they both go through as third place, and maybe it was France, Argentina semi-final, final. I think it worked out, but it wasn't sort of too difficult, I think, the route. So it's still coming home, hopefully.
Yeah, okay. I'm not quite so sure that I'm as confident as you about that, but we'll see. And congratulations, by the way, to Luka Modric, who overnight at the age of 40 played his 200th game for Croatia. He joins his elite list. I was talking to you before we came on, George. It's a classic list of 4 names: Luka Modric, Cristiano Ronaldo, who of course was amongst the goals yesterday, Lionel Messi, who's banging them in left, right and centre at this World Cup. And then you've got Beda Al-Mutawa of Kuwait. They're the only 4 men to have played 200 or more senior games for their country. I mean, what a little group for Beda to be part of. He's going to be dining off that for the rest of his life, isn't he?
That is classic after dinner material, that, isn't it? After dinner speaking material. Would you believe that I am part of a select club? It's incredible. I mean, it's been a good World Cup, hasn't it, for the sort of legends? Seeing Messi doing what he was doing. I was watching that the other night, just in awe of him. And I watched a bit of Ronaldo yesterday, who's so desperate to get a hat-trick and missed a couple of chances he probably should have scored. But yeah, it's good to see all the... I mean, Harry obviously didn't deliver on Tuesday night, but it's good to see the majority of the legends scoring goals left, right and centre. Haaland's getting some as well.
Yeah.
Your man Lewandowski, unfortunately, not there.
He's not. George, he's not my man anymore. Now he's buggering off to Chicago. I have no interest in him whatsoever. But I've got to say, in our family sweepstake, I mean, I got New Zealand, which doesn't really help. But because there's 48 teams, we're having to give every connected person to the family a team. Our two cats have got Norway. So come on, Erling Haaland, keep doing the business. This could be one of the great fairy tale stories. Closer to home, we're going to come to some of your great questions, by the way, and thank you so much. We are, of course, available on so many different platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Insta, X, once we get our account set up again, all the other reputable pod platforms. You can get in touch in all those ways. You can email us as well, the tottenhamwaypod@gmail.com. That's the tottenhamwaypod@gmail.com. And we've got some terrific correspondence, which we'll come to in just a moment. One or two bits of headline news, though. First of all, the search for a goalkeeper has, it would seem, been stepped up with Martin Dubravka, vastly experienced, George, now at the age of 37, being heavily linked with the club, which would suggest that Vicario is going to go and that Antonin Kinsky will start next season as our number one. Do you think that those reports are pretty accurate?
Yeah, they seem to be. And the thing with Dubravka is, which I don't think many people instantly associate him with, but he's incredible with his feet by all accounts. I was reading a little bit about him yesterday, and he basically, I think he once said, he sees himself as a midfielder. He sees himself as a right midfielder. Really, that's his position. He's just playing in goal as he's a bit on the side. But he,
how many goalkeepers? Do you know how many goalkeepers think that? They're all convinced they could be fantastic outfield players, aren't they? I mean, you've got to be mad to be a goalkeeper, and that's an example of it, I guess.
Absolutely, but yeah, he's very good with his feet. I mean, he's 37. Just coming off the back of, clearly a difficult season with Burnley, but, played the majority of the games and, was pretty good, I think. When you're facing that many shots, you've got to be half decent. And I don't remember Burnley getting thrashed all the time last season. I know they lost a lot of games, but it was, often by the odd goal. So, yeah, I think it's it's the clearest indication yet that Kinsky is going to be given the number one role, and we've got some questions about that, and maybe
Yes.
I'll get your thoughts on that in more detail, Marcus. I know you're a little bit reluctant about that, but I have to say I think it's probably a wise move in a summer where Spurs are going to be spending big money. They already have on a centre back. They're going to spend big money on a centre midfielder, and certainly on at least one forward, but maybe a couple. You can probably get away with the goalkeeper position, I think, this season with one game a week. And, if it is a disaster for Kinsky, then you can change that plan in January perhaps or in the summer. So I think it may make sense to bring in an experienced goalkeeper that's going to be the number two and allow Kinsky the opportunity that I think he probably has deserved after those 7 games to show that he's good enough to be Spurs' keeper. And if he does show he's good enough, then that position is really locked in for 10 years because he's so young. So that's obviously the ideal scenario. It could go in a different direction, but hopefully he can kick on from those 7 games knowing that he is the main man.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make that the lack of fixtures Spurs are going to have next season maybe makes it less of a gamble. But you're quite right. We've got some really good questions about that, which we'll come to shortly. Now, one thing that worried me, and we will revisit this subject a bit later when we talk about young players in general, but lots of reports a couple of days ago, George, that Lucas Bergvall is not happy. And I initially heard that Chelsea were sniffing. And I have to say, I can see Lucas Bergvall in a blue Chelsea shirt and it makes me shudder. So what is happening as far as he's concerned?
Yes, it's kind of this is part of, the Vuskovic chat, and I think the whole wider club direction chat really in terms of what are the club doing this summer. And clearly the priority is short term, and you understand why, but as much as I could probably stomach Vuskovic moving on, as long as it's a hefty fee, because at the end of the day, that's a guy that's never played for us. And, I don't think he really does have a connection with Tottenham, albeit obviously he's been contracted to the club for a couple of seasons now, officially 12 months, but signed in 23. For me, I don't personally have a connection with him. I do have a connection with Lucas Bergvall because I thought he was, wonderful, especially that second half of 2 seasons ago, 24, 25. And, I remember how devastated we all were when he got injured against Bodo, thinking, oh God, this is a guy that's running midfield for us at the minute in all these big games. He's phenomenal in some of those games. That AZ Alkmaar at home. I remember him being brilliant against Frankfurt. I think against Frankfurt he sort of smashed one from about 30 yards and was so close to scoring the wonderful winner. And at that point, 18, 19 years old, he just looked, a future Luka Modric essentially. And I am concerned about that one. I think it would be. I understand the need for the club to be short-sighted, and they've got to prioritise short-term because it's been 17th back-to-back. But I just think you don't get rid of Lucas Bergvall after one inconsistent season, and that is all it is. Clearly, some players have to be moved on, absolutely, but I would rather be moving on someone like Pape Sarr, someone that's been here longer. I don't think he has the potential of Lucas Bergvall. And the other big issue with this is that, when Lucas Bergvall and Archie Gray were signed, a big part of that kind of strategy was because they were both in 3 years' time going to be club trained. And it's a complicated matter, really. But essentially, when you name a 25-player squad for a European competition, unless you have 4 players that are club trained, you can't name a 25-player squad. You lose a player every time. You can't fill one of that 4 quota, and that was why was it last season Spurs left out Matty Tell because they didn't have room, because they only had Brandon Austin and somebody else, I can't name escapes me. They'd one other club trained player. I think two club trained players at the end of the day. And Archie Gray next season will be club trained. Lucas Bergvall next season would be club trained. Brandon Austin is still around, so he would also be. So to kind of throw all that in the bin on top of him being an enormous talent just doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. And it's probably the first real dodgy move, I'd say, that we've seen from the club this summer. It does sound like he wants to move on, and I can sort of understand why he would, because his pathway has been hugely blocked. But I think Spurs have to try and find a way, I think, of keeping him, because he's too big a talent. Yeah. He's too... we're going to potentially sign someone this summer for 100 million. He is a 100 million midfielder in 4 years' time, potentially. Yeah. Now, I get that's in 4 years' time, but he really is. And you know what will happen. You know we will sell him. And then in 2 years, when our midfield doesn't look so good because all these guys we've signed are suddenly kind of getting to, past their peak, we're going to think, oh, actually, that guy, Lucas Bergvall, for Club X is doing brilliant. I wonder how much he would cost. Oh, 100 million. I really hope it doesn't transpire. As at the moment, it feels like it might do with Lucas, that he might move on.
Well, I sincerely hope he doesn't. And if he does, he must not be allowed to go to Chelsea or anybody like that. I get, like you, why he's frustrated. And we'll talk. We've got another good question coming up shortly about how some of the very best young players have been thwarted in terms of personal ambition over the past year or two. But he does have so much ability. And I really feel as though he would be a massive loss. Interesting, by the way, that Vuskovic did not play for Croatia last night. We got some questions on him in a moment. We're also going to touch upon Cristian Romero, who had quite a funny little set to with Kevin Danso as Argentina played Austria. I don't think there was anything untoward going on there, but one or two of you got some really useful things to say about Romero, and there are some reports circulating today. I don't know how reliable they are, but suggesting that 3 Premier League teams are after him: Manchester United, Brentford and Crystal Palace. Sergio Romero to Brentford or Crystal Palace. We'll see about that. But just before we delve into a few of the questions, George, you've written a really interesting piece in The Independent today on the back of the recent fan advisory board meeting. Lots has been said by the club, by the likes of Vinai. Some pretty strong defence of what Johan Lange has been doing as well. In a nutshell, can you surmise what the key points were emerging from that meeting?
Yeah, really interesting, actually. The fan advisory board is essentially different members from each supporters group get to meet the club every 3 months, I think it is. So, you've got somebody from Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust, proud Lily White, Spurs reach. There was a season ticket holder there, just as a kind of the season ticket holder representative, and it is their chance to kind of hold the club to account. And they did a really good job earlier this season. I can't remember if it was February or March, when obviously everything was hitting the fan, and essentially the club sort of pinned the blame at that point on what's happened previously. And the meeting that's just taken place, in fairness to the club, all the key figures were there actually, which is not always the case. It's normally just one, and Vinai has been in a lot of the meetings, in fairness to him. But at the most recent meeting, Vinai was there. The new director of football operations, Rafi Moersen, was there. Kate Miller, the head of comms, she joined virtually. Can't remember if actually Johan Lange or not was there, but yeah, it was a very interesting meeting. Vinai outlined some different areas where they're trying to rebuild the connection of the supporters, and said that one of the challenges is misinformation, which is interesting because there is certain journalists that they could easily speak to and squash any misinformation, but that hasn't been done. But one of the really interesting parts is on the sporting director front. He was asked specifically about that, and I'll read out what he said. Obviously, this is in the meetings. There's not a direct quote, but I think it's quite telling. Vinai said, "The club has confidence in our people, but if we find someone who can complement our existing team and make it better, we will do that at the right time. Brackets, and in a summer window is not that time. Close brackets. No one in the process has turned us down. There are many names in the media linked that we have never spoken to." So I think we all kind of expected at some point a sporting director would come in this summer, but it clearly seems like that's now on the back burner. And it is Johan and Roberto De Zerbi driving the recruitment, with Rafi Moersen part of that as well, because it was actually his first day. That this meeting happened on June the 16th, and that was his first day at the club, first official day at the club after he was put on garden leave by the City Football Group, and he joined the meeting, which is very good of him, and sort of outlined his own roles and responsibilities. He said his remit includes recruitment, player transactions, infrastructure, player care, and the responsibility for the women's team. He also emphasised the importance of player welfare, relationship building, and improving football outcomes, and was previously involved in player training at City. So, I think many of us wondered kind of, how significant Rafi Moersen would be. It feels like, instantly he's in that recruitment area and will be supporting Johan Lange and De Zerbi with the deals this summer. And he's a very, very experienced operator, was actually working for Man City for a number of years and then part of the wider football group doing different deals there. So I was always quite excited to see what he could do when he came in. And he's only been in the job, a week officially, coming up to 2 weeks. But I think he is someone that knows how an elite football club should be run, and hopefully him in there, Dan Lewington in there, I think was also part of the meeting. Spurs will start acting like an elite football club again, and they have made some good steps this summer. But plenty of interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, there is. I hope he's good because, feelings obviously start to die down a few weeks after the end of what was a tumultuous season. But if we just go back to February, March, April time, everybody was saying, irrespective of whether Spurs stay up or go down, big changes have got to be made at the top of the club. There's no way that Johan Lange and Vinai can hang on, certainly both of them. And now it sounds as though both of them are going to. And they put a block, if that's the right word, or certainly they're now not looking for a sporting director in the summer window. Surely that's the time to get everyone bedded in before a new season starts. I don't know, but hopefully Rafi is going to be the man to make the difference.
The only thing I'd say with that, Marcus, is I wonder if they've kind of learned from the Fabio Paratici scenario where he came in, about a month, 2 months before the January window. And clearly that had an effect on the way that window played out. You've got someone that in Fabio that's came in, he's got his ideas, Johan's got his ideas, Thomas Frank's got his ideas. All of a sudden, Fabio, after being at the club 2 months, he doesn't want to be there. That would have impacted in January. So I sort of wonder if they feel content essentially letting De Zerbi drive the recruitment alongside Johan Lange. We know De Zerbi's obviously got a big say in signings. That isn't always the case for head coaches. You can either have a head coach who is purely there coaching, and he'll let the sporting director buy players for the club, and he'll coach the players, as we've seen Chelsea do a number of times. Or you have a different structure where the manager is central to the recruitment, and clearly De Zerbi is central to the recruitment. Hence, the big target of Sandro Tonali, someone he knows well and obviously wants to sign. So yeah, I do kind of understand it to an extent why they've paused it. They're going to allow this window to happen and then try and get someone in later on in the year. One other thing I meant to note was Peter Charrington, the non-executive chairman. He said there's a new metric that they use now when it comes to any decision making, and that is, does this make us a better football team? Which, okay, is words, and it should have absolutely been the case a long time ago.
I was going to say, George, a new metric. Does this make us a better football team? What was the old metric? Can we make sure that this makes us a worse football team?
Well, I think clearly the answer would have been, does this make us more money? Is this good commercially? Is this, what can we do for the club? And the one prime example that instantly springs to mind is when Spurs went to Australia at the end of the season, Ange's first season, for a post-season friendly. Does that make Spurs a better football team, jetting the players off, halfway across the world, 2 days? I think they went straight from the Sheffield United win to Australia. I don't think that would have made them a better football team. So I think it's that kind of stuff which you now hope every single decision the club makes is driven in what will it do for the football team, what will it do for the first team, and football is at the forefront of decisions again, rather than it being business, commercial, which has clearly been the case in recent years.
I'll believe that when it happens. And we have got a question actually about why Spurs tend to tour in certain parts of the world. I note also that in that meeting, the club made it very clear that Peter Charrington does know how many players are required to make up a football team. I'm so glad to know that. Right, let's delve into some of the issues that have been raised by our fantastic listeners and viewers. And we start with Darren Godwin Evans on Spotify. We're talking about the goalkeeping situation. And he says, if it was me, I'd make Kinsky number 1, Austin number 2, and I'd let Archer and Gunter compete for number 3. He's written this obviously before the reports came out that Dubravka is likely to join the club. He goes on to say, let the academy serve a purpose so we can spend in other areas. It's going to be a good side. I have top 3 vibes. Roy Ferguson 2297 says Kinsky's saves are why we are still in the Premier League. And that's a fair point. And that is why he's almost certainly going to start next season as number 1. And TVGCMMA9215 says, I think goalkeeping-wise, we need a Fraser Forster type, but who is closer to their peak than he was, i.e. they know that their career is coming to an end. They're happy to be the number 2 and that they have a good personality and, if necessary, can come in and replace Kinsky if things go wrong. And to that end, George, I would suggest that Dubravka would appear from the outside to be the perfect selection.
Yeah, I think Dubravka probably is. And I guess, just sort of covering all of those, I completely agree with Roy Ferguson. Kinsky's saves are why we're in the Premier League. The Leeds one, the Wolves one, the Everton save. You take those 3 away and that accumulation of points and we are down. And it's funny, I had Sky Sports up the other day, in the corner on is all the Premier League teams, and my little boy pointed to Spurs, and I sort of said to him, we almost weren't in that. There's 20 Premier League teams there, and we almost weren't part of the fixture list last Friday, and it would have been the Championship fixture this Thursday. And that's that is a big part of Kinsky, because he's brilliant in those games. And just with Dubravka, going to Darren's question, it's obviously, it would be wonderful for Austin to be second choice and for Archer and Luka Gunter to be the number 3. Unfortunately, it's just too much for a gamble. I think Brandon Austin's been at the club a long time now, and he has been given some opportunities, and he's never let Spurs down. Remember him in Hoffenheim. I think he did quite well against Newcastle as well in a Premier League game. But you've got to remember that these guys are being seen every single day by the manager, being seen every single day by the goalkeeper coach. They'll know the difference in level. And I just think, if anything, if you started the season with Kinsky as number one, Austin as number two, and Archer and Gunter as number three, if Kinsky gets injured in the first day after the the August window shuts, and you've got Brandon Austin playing the first 15 games until January, and after 2 weeks you clearly realise he's not at the level, then Spurs have just essentially wasted another season, because if you don't have a good goalkeeper, you're not going to get anywhere in the league. He's a Tottenham lad through and through and club trained, but I think he's comfortable with his role as a third choice goalkeeper, and that's why you did need to bring someone like Dubravka in, because of the injury scenario. And also you want somebody to be pushing Kinsky. You don't want Kinsky just to think he has got an easy ride. And look, Dubravka's been at Man United, he's been at Newcastle, was very, very good at Newcastle, and has also just started plenty of games in the Premier League. So Kinsky has to be on it if he wants to keep his place, because you've got someone who could genuinely be a first choice goalkeeper in the Premier League there waiting if he does make a mistake.
Yeah. No, I think that signing would make a lot of sense. And I know he's 37, but to be honest, goalkeepers these days, 37 is absolutely fine. So some interesting points there. Now, on the subject of new signings, in general, of course, we've been talking about Sandro Tonali, about Matheus Fernandes. Should Spurs spend as much as £100 million on one player? Well, if they want Tonali, it seems that they're going to have to spend that sort of money, George, because one bid has apparently already been rejected at around 80 million. Do you expect Spurs to go back in? Do you still think they've got a genuine chance of landing him?
He seems the big target, the one that Roberto De Zerbi wants. So yeah, I think it's Spurs were going to push as much as they can. It is a lot of money, no doubt about it. But then I guess is it the equivalent of Declan Rice? It sort of is, isn't it? Declan Rice went for 100 million, wasn't it? And I think he's a similar profile to Sandro Tonali, so it could be our Declan Rice signing. And I think if they can get Tonali over the line, it would sort of make our midfield quite serious again. I feel like Tom Warner always uses that word, being a serious club. And if you sort of pair in Bentancur and Sandro Tonali, that is a real robust and strong midfield. And we touched upon in other pods about the centre backs now being at the club. Jan Paul van Hecker and Marcus Senesi, both excellent with the ball at their feet, and them sort of opening up the channels to get Spurs playing football again. So it takes a little bit of pressure off Bentancur and potentially Tonali if he can come in. But I think Tonali is a good passer of the ball. I don't think any suggestions he's not good on the ball, or if there are any suggestions he's not good on the ball, then I'd say they're inaccurate. I don't think he's an Adam Wharton level, but I think he's very good on the ball. But it's all about will Spurs get to that dream price for Newcastle? I think it's not long after we finished recording, Marcus, the sort of talk of a 75 million bid came out being rejected. Sounds like 85 million, or certainly north of 85 million, is where Newcastle want to get it to. I don't think Arsenal will go back in, but maybe Man City are still kind of there, waiting to make a decision. So I certainly think out of Matheus Fernandes and Tonali, I think it's probably Tonali that's more likely to happen. I mean, could you see us signing both? 100 million on both? That seems a lot, doesn't it?
No, that does seem a lot when we've got a fair few other options. I mean, the one thing that caught my eye last week, again, I never know. I mean, I trust you guys, of course, but there was one report I read that suggested that they could do a deal with Newcastle, seeing Dominic Solanke go the other way. And actually, I know we're really short in terms of goal scorers, but I would be tempted if that was the way financially to sort things out. What do you reckon?
I can understand the temptation. I don't think, and I can see why that would be mentioned, because Eddie Howe worked with Dominic Solanke at Bournemouth, not for a very long period, if I remember rightly, but I think that they do have quite a good rapport. I seem to remember, I think maybe it was the January that Bournemouth went down, that Solanke was signed, and Solanke sort of feeling some type of, he didn't have the best start at Bournemouth. And I think he felt some type of, quite a big responsibility that he wasn't able to score the goals to keep the club up. So I think they do have a link there. But I think De Zerbi really likes Solanke, so I can't see that happening. And obviously, there's would leave Spurs in a situation where they've only got Richarlison and Will Lancashire, who I'd love to see get a chance, but we can't be going into the season with Richarlison as number one striker. As much as I gave him Player of the Year, and I've taken a lot of flack for it, he can't be number one striker. I accept that.
I thought you'd been standing outside his door with a new contract, just asking him to sign it. Lord Spurs. Lord Sugar might watch and listen to us. I hope not, to be honest, mate. If you are watching or are listening, you were a disaster when you were at the club. Lord Spurs on YouTube says, we do need one £100 million signing, whoever it is, to prove that things have changed. That is the new big player level. And he goes on to say he'd rather keep Will Lancashire than Mikey Moore because he scores all types of goals and has done well in a Spurs shirt. Hotspur Sam 4972 says, with regards to Mateus Fernandes, well, he's been relegated 2 seasons in a row. I'd like Alex Scott. He's got the potential to be another Michael Carrick for us. And he's a big Spurs fan as well, isn't he? I haven't heard him being mentioned at all, though.
Yeah, he's a big Spurs fan. I saw him being linked to Arsenal the other day, actually. Yeah, Spurs seem to have kind of moved away from that. There was a sort of tentative talks at the start of June, I'd say, around Alex Scott. It was sort of Alex Scott, Sandro Tonali, I think Adam Wharton at that stage as well, maybe Gibbs White, but they've sort of, they've not escalated as maybe some people would have anticipated. Alex Scott's a really good player. I guess if you compare him to Tonali's just that a little bit more experienced. And I think maybe Fernandes is slightly better on the ball than Alex Scott. They're sort of similar ages. I think Fernandes is only 21 and Alex Scott's 23, I think, on top of my head. But yeah, I sort of am surprised, Spurs haven't done that before, to be honest, not even just this summer, just before. It seemed like an obvious one for us to do. But yeah, if he went to Arsenal, that would be terrible. But yeah, I sort of Lord Spurs. I do see where he's coming from. I think it feels like this summer, we've heard actions speak louder than words from the Lewis family. I think it would be a real statement for them to spend 100 million on one player, or certainly 100 million package on one player. And I guess if you're going to do that, you want it to be somebody that is going to come in and be there straight away and improve the level, Premier League proven. As much as there are obviously brilliant talents all across the board, for 100 million, it's got to be someone that's definitely going to make a big difference. And I think the feeling is that is Tonali. Maybe it is Fernandes as well, but I think the feeling is it's definitely Tonali that will do that. And that is the going rate for midfielders, for top quality midfielders.
Yeah.
So I think if they're going to spend it on anyone, it would be him, Tonali.
Yeah, they should, but don't bet on it, which is an unfortunate connection because we know what happened to Tonali, but that's all in the past. That's been forgiven. One person that Richard Joseph 5818 does not want us to spend any money on, George, is Savinho. He goes, no, with a whole host of O's and exclamation marks. He's done little to nothing in England, says Richard. What's the difference between him and Mateus Tell in practical terms? We need to improve our quality significantly. He is in the same pot alongside the likes of Tell and Odegaard. And I think from the moment we heard of the interest once again in Savinho, George, we were both kind of cynical. He didn't really float our boat, and he definitely doesn't start to float my boat now. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not mad on it still. I think I said last week I spoke to somebody who was very big on him, and clearly he's a very talented player. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying. We need someone that's ready to come in now and make the impact instantly. And maybe Savinho, given a chance and given the confidence, does do that. But he's still age-wise very young, isn't he? 22, maybe going to be turning 23 this season. You made the shout the other day, Marcus, about your namesake, Marcus Rashford. And every time I watch him now, when he comes on, I know he didn't score against Ghana last night, but few nice moments, and I'm tempted by that one. I really am. The more I see him, and the more it seems like, I think Barcelona would love to bring him back, but the deal's got to be right. But I don't think it's going to cost enormous amount transfer fee to get someone like Marcus Rashford. Wages is obviously where there is a bit of a sticking point. But a fit and firing Marcus Rashford would just be brilliant.
I think so, George. I think so, because I think he feels as though he's got something to prove. I mean, you look at both Rashford and Anthony Gordon, who's getting the nod at the moment from Thomas Tuchel. I'd be surprised if that's the case in the next game. Gordon works as hard as he can, but Rashford has certainly caught the eye. And when he went to Aston Villa, yeah, there was a sense that I'm a good player. I need to show that. And I do think that there's a real possibility as far as he's concerned, certainly as opposed to Savinho. On the subject of our captain, Cristian Romero, James on Spotify asks the question, is he the worst captain we've ever had? That's a good question. I think I might say yes to that. Martin McCann 11 on Spotify says, he treats us so badly, but I still love Romero. We have to keep him. The most we could hope to sell him for is £40 million. With 3 years left, it's better value to keep him, especially when the new board intend to finally take steps to address the player level talent and break the wage structure to do it. City with better players. And what's the end bit, please? City with better players to pass to please.
QT with better players. That's
cute. I should have put my glasses on. No, it is your fault. You sent that to me. I'm sorry. Manchester City. Sorry, I do normally read everything in advance. QT with better players to pass to please. So real mixed opinions. He's that sort of player, isn't he? He divides opinion. I think we're both of the opinion that it's time for him to go. But I read today, and I mentioned it at the top of the show, that he's starting to think he wants to stay, and if he doesn't stay at Spurs, he might go to Brentford or Crystal Palace or Manchester United. What is going to happen with QT?
Yeah, Romero certainly fits that kind of, the Brentford data-led approach, doesn't he? I think. No, just going to the first question, is Romero the worst captain we've ever had? Absolutely not. The worst captain we ever had let his contract run down to leave us on a free to join our North London rivals. So that is the worst captain we ever had. No if, no buts. I'm not even going to name him because...
did you see him, by the way, did you see him on Sky the other day making an absolute fool of himself when asked to predict how England were going to predict in their World Cup games, and he says, "Is it home or away?" I mean, it's the World Cup. I mean, the man. Say no more. Say no more.
I think he was Southend manager once upon a time. But anyway, there is a real irony with this Romero scenario in that, and I've obviously defended him a lot when he's taken pot shots at the board, because I've always understood perhaps where he's coming from, that, we are Tottenham, we should be aiming higher than we are. We're lacking ambition with our signings, with our wages, and then the summer Spurs start to show ambitions with their signings and with their wages. We want to kick him out the door. But I think it's just one of those scenarios, a little bit like Cristiano Ronaldo in Portugal at the minute. It's just there's just always a drama with Romero, and I think I can understand why the club want to move on from that. And I mentioned Tom Walnuts, he's bang on. We want to be a serious football club again. And Marcus Senesi is a serious footballer. Andrew Robertson is a serious footballer. Jan Paul van Heck is a serious footballer. Sandro Tonali would be as well. These are all serious guys that aren't, producing a 4 or 5 out of 10 and getting themselves sent off and having a head loss as regularly as Romero has, unfortunately. So that is why even I'm at the point where I think it is the right time to move on. But if you don't find a bidder, then it is obviously an awkward scenario. And look, he would be brilliant in a De Zerbi team. I said that when he joined. It could be a match made in heaven or a match made in hell. And if you did have a fit and firing, motivated Romero, it could be brilliant. But it feels like he's one of the sellable assets. It feels like he has gained too much power over the last few years at the club, and it's the right time to sort of cut the cord. And especially if you want to keep around some of the younger centre-backs like Vuskovic and United
Absolutely.
further down the line. So I think it is the time to move on. I'll make my bold prediction: he is not going Crystal Palace, and he is not going Brentford.
Yeah, it's gonna.
I don't think
But
he's going
these
Man
are.
United either, because I was told that was rubbish. So I think it's Atletico, isn't it? It's Atletico, or maybe Real Madrid. But they've got, they've just signed Canate. They've already got Rudiger and a few others. So I think if Atletico sell Julian Alvarez, his Argentinian teammate, as we all think they are going to, for a lot of money this summer, then it probably leads itself into Romero signing for them. But again, it's
Well,
going to be after the World Cup. I think I'd be stunned if that happens before the World Cup finishes.
yeah, no, I mean, we all know when he's on, he's a great player, but yeah, far too much drama. And the fact that he's only played, 48% of games over the past couple of years must bruise his ego a little bit, though, if there aren't that many genuine bids coming in for him. And I'm afraid ultimately he's only got himself to blame because he has not conducted himself, I would suggest, as a Premier League captain should. Now, on the subject of Vuskovic, and we spoke a lot about him last week. Of course, he played against England. We mentioned that he didn't play against Panama last night. Steve Taylor, 6939, says the Vuskovic situation seems rather like the Graham Souness story back in 1972. He was a prodigious talent. He was 19 years of age. He wanted first-team football. He believed he deserved it. Bill Nicholson could not guarantee that. I think Souness says Steve was more restless than Vuskovic back then. He got his way. He went to Middlesbrough under the tutelage of Jack Charlton, and we lost an elite player who went on to have a glorious career. Let's hope Vuskovic has such a great World Cup that Spurs realise they cannot sell him. Well, I don't think he's going to have a great World Cup, but in some ways, as you, I think, said last week, George, that might be better because it douses some of the flames, and maybe the 19-year-old thinks, okay, I'm good. I'm not quite as good as some of those people around me are suggesting. Olo Leader says, I completely agree that selling Vuskovic outright for £30 million would be madness. But I do think there is a more sophisticated version of this deal that people maybe aren't discussing enough. If Spurs genuinely believe that Brighton is the best development pathway for him, regular Premier League minutes, a strong environment for young players, and potentially a clearer route into the team than he currently has at Tottenham, then the only way a sale should even be considered is with a Real Madrid stroke Nico Paz style structure. Now, Madrid sold Nico Paz to Como, but they didn't really lose control of the asset. They inserted buyback clauses, kept a major sell-on interest, and effectively made it difficult for other clubs to simply come in and take the player away from them. It was a very smart structure. Como got the player and developed him. Paz got minutes, but Madrid protected themselves just in case he became elite. That is the only type of logic that could make sense with Vuskovic. And on the face of things, George, that sounds like a very good idea.
Yeah, it does. I certainly think that if Spurs could do that, they probably would. But I don't think a Brighton would agree to that. I don't think you're going to get many teams that agree to that. Como are doing that because they've just at that point been promoted to Serie A, and they know they're about to get a wonderful talent. It's probably the best way for them to get a wonderful talent. I'd be surprised if Brighton were happy to do that, but you never know. But Brighton does feel like a really good step for him if he plays every week and plays in Europe and is in the Premier League and he's part of a ball playing system. He's playing a high line. That would be ideal, but it just feels like he doesn't want that. And look, he's clearly his camp are actively pushing for a move, and I don't think that's necessarily the case for all of the Spurs youngsters that are being told they're maybe not going to get the minutes they want this season. But he is the one pushing the most. And yeah, the Graham Souness comparison is really good, actually. I mean, I remember reading that a few years ago about Souness, and I had no idea he came through at Tottenham, so that was a really interesting tale. But then I think Souness came through the same time as Steve Perryman, didn't he? So maybe if Graham Souness comes through, we don't get our Super Stevie Perryman record club appearance holder. I mean, how do you sort of feel about Vuskovic, Marcus? I mean, I said at the top, I don't really have that personal connection to him because he's not played for our club yet, but I do with Bergvall. I mean, do you feel like that, or are you sort of thinking, no, it's madness to sell him?
Yeah, and that's interesting. Actually, I'll bring in the next question because it relates to that. Baller 1961 says, if Vuskovic does want to leave, shouldn't we just try and get the best possible deal for him? And asks us what our view is on want-away players in general. And, you know, normally when you talk about this, managers speak, fans speak. Well, if the player doesn't want to be at the club, then get rid of him. Which sounds great, but in certain circumstances, and we've already spoken about Lucas Bergvall, but I understand why he might want to leave at the moment. I would be very, very reluctant to let him go, though, because we've already seen, as you rightly said, the second half of the season before last, he was great. And I think he's been unlucky. Last season, he's just, you know, Thomas Frank never put his arm around him, apparently, just didn't get a start there. And obviously it was emergency stations towards the end of the season with Roberto De Zerbi just doing what he had to do. So, of course, Bergvall is in a bit of a dilemma. He's not making that progress that he looked to be doing, but I would want to do everything possible to keep him at the club. With regards to Vuskovic, I mean, I haven't seen enough of him. I wasn't overly impressed with him against England, but I think it's very hard to judge him on that game in particular. I don't like the fact that I suspect he's got the wrong people around him. If they're causing this much trouble with a 19-year-old, that's an issue. So, yeah, I honestly don't know. But my gut instinct is if enough people think he's that good, we hold the cards with him and you just say, mate, you're going on loan. End of deal. End of situation. That would be my philosophy on that. Baller also asks, by the way, because there are the Brighton connections ever since De Zerbi came in. We all know what a great player Kaoru Mitoma is and what a shame that he's injured and missing the World Cup. But Baller does suggest that a fit Mitoma, would be a fantastic addition for Tottenham. Have we been linked at all with him, either in the recent or distant past?
I don't think really strongly with Mitoma. I don't think that link has really been there. If this was 12 months ago, I mean, actually saying that, I think maybe at one point under Ange there was, because Ange had some sort of link with Mitoma. Maybe he'd faced him in the Japanese league. It was something like that. And maybe he'd even recommended him or tried to sign him at Celtic or somewhere before. But I think actually Mitoma's a fantastic footballer, but injuries are kind of becoming more frequent with him now. And he's probably a good example of the mixed feelings with De Zerbi and some of these young players, because Mitoma's best season for Brighton was under De Zerbi. You know, De Zerbi has this ability to sort of really raise the floor of these players, you know, young and old. You know, another one was Pascal Gross. Pascal Gross is a very good footballer, but he was unbelievable under De Zerbi. And that's why I look at someone like Bergvall and Gray and Mikey Moore, and I'm so excited by what De Zerbi could do with them if given the opportunity. But I obviously understand at the same time he hasn't got time to be developing young talents, as you know, we need to be finished top 5 again, top 6 again, and if he can't rely on them now, then he's looking to players that he can rely on straight away in the short term. But I don't think Mitoma would be a realistic one. His age and his injury record mainly, but I just think there'll be other players in that position that are probably more of a short bet, I think, than Mitoma. But wonderful footballer on his day, as he showed us at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in April.
Well, he did. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he came off the bench, played beautifully, and then got subbed again. But yeah, a lovely player, wonderful player. On this subject of young talent, EI Spurs 1 says, could you do an episode on the likes of Tel Yang and Bergvall? It looks like Thomas Frank has ruined at least 3 of the youngsters, which is really sad. EI Spurs 1 says, I saw a video where Yang is at the World Cup with media credentials. I didn't realise that. He's getting recognised by people. Now we hear that Bergvall wants to move as well. Please do share your thoughts with us. Well, we have gone into some detail. And I mean, the point, without trying to reiterate everything again too much, is that for many years, George, it seems to me that we've always been buying for the future. We bring in these young players. How exciting is that? And then more often than not, we never bloody see them again. And I'm sorry, I'm getting to an age now. I don't care about I do care about the future. I want success now. I don't want to be building for 3, 4, 5. It doesn't ever happen like that. Things change, managers come and go, players lose their form, they get poached, whatever. So I'm not that bothered about these youngsters coming through. Bergvall for me is an exception, but and we both like Tell, but ultimately, if he's not ready, I'll send him out on loan for now, because every season goes by and suddenly the future's the past. And I think that's been a real issue with Spurs for far too long now.
Yeah, it is. There is a middle ground here, and I think that's hopefully where Spurs are going to end up, because why we're in this situation now is because under Mourinho and under Conte, it was all about win now, win now, win now. And Spurs forgot to develop their squad, and they forgot to plan their squad accordingly for the years ahead. And that's why you get in a situation where Ange comes in and he's asked to do an enormous rebuild. And part of the rebuild is signing so many young players. But unfortunately, Spurs have signed so many young players all at one time that the squad isn't, and they are, the squad isn't good enough to do what a Tottenham squad should be doing. And two, those guys haven't got the players around them to be given, the right time and the right sort of environment to develop. And I mean, sometimes it benefits, someone like Archie Gray, I think, has benefited loads from the last 2 years and played an enormous amount of games. And yes, he's played those games because of injuries, but he's developed a huge amount. And Bergvall's had one of those seasons, 24-25, but last season wasn't so much one of those. I do think the real issue with Bergvall was he was just misprofiled by Thomas Frank from day one. And I remember us talking, and I was saying it when we'd had the trouble with signing the number 10s, and I think we only got Xavi, or maybe it was in before Xavi came in, and I said, there's maybe a world where Bergvall could be used in the sort of Dele Alli type number 10, where he's a runner, he's making runs from deep, box to box. But that's not his position. That's just him being used as that kind of, he could do a job there if needed every so often. But it seems like Thomas Frank saw him as that player or a right midfielder, and neither of those are his main positions. In that first season under Ange, after a difficult start, it should be remembered, I remember being in Galatasaray and the noise was deafening, but something that was very clear is that Lucas wasn't on it that night, and he wasn't good enough for Tottenham then. And then he went through a bit of a process, got taken out of the firing line. His body got up to the speed and the intensity required. And he came back and he produced that wonderful performance against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup. And there was multiple good performances. That's why he won Spurs Player of the Year. I'm not sure he was their Player of the Year, but he was developing fantastically then. And he's just had his development completely halted by mainly Thomas Frank. And that's kind of part of why I have a lot of frustration with Thomas Frank, that Tell, Bergvall, I won't put Yang in this category personally, but Tell and Bergvall in particular, their development was completely stunted by Thomas Frank because he used them incorrectly or just didn't use them at all in Tell's case. And this is what happens after that. The club have sold promises to these players. Those promises have been broken by one manager. And then their new manager comes in and gives them promises, but they don't want to believe it because they've just lost a year, basically. Tell got enough minutes in the end, so it wasn't a wasted year, but probably felt like a wasted year for Bergvall. And that's why I have a bit of sympathy for him versus Vuskovic, because he's kind of thinking, can I have another year of being told I will get chances and I don't get chances, and then all of a sudden I've had 2 key years at the age he is, where he hasn't got the minutes he needs to develop. So it's a really frustrating situation. And I think someone did say to me this week, feels like Spurs are chucking away their future to have a better present, and it's hard. It's hard because they do need to have a better present, but you don't want to chuck away the whole future. I think there is a way where you sell some, but you keep the sort of jewels of the crown if you can.
Well, absolutely, and it comes down to De Zerbi. We know how much authority he's got to sit down with Bergvall and whatever the manager says. If he does believe in Lucas Bergvall, hopefully the player will accept that and appreciate. I was let down by your predecessor, but I believe you can make me a better player and make me a regular part of the team. And De Zerbi is being honest enough. I read today that Manor Solomon has been told he has no future at the club, so he can leave. De Zerbi strikes me as being the sort of guy who will be absolutely honest with his players, and hopefully he'll get a good response from Bergvall as a result of that. Dan Woodruff's been in touch, George, says, why do we always skip over Jamie Donnelly? He's already got 10 caps for Northern Ireland and 2 goals. Why don't we give a pathway to the first team to such promising players as him?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I'm a big fan of Jamie Donnelly. Tottenham is my club, but I've got a huge affection for Leyton Orient, and Jamie was fantastic for Leyton Orient 2 seasons ago and scored some wonderful goals, and basically scored against Man City in the FA Cup, but it was given as an own goal because he hit the crossbar and hit the goalkeeper. But he was just fantastic that day, and he had a really good loan at Leyton Orient. Last season was tricky for him. He went to Oxford second half of the season. I'm trying to think off the top of my head where he went the first half of the season. It was Stoke. He went first half of the season and just didn't get a look in at all. The trouble for him now is if you've not had that chance and then you've not taken that chance at his age, which I think he's 22 now, it's going to be difficult to get it, unfortunately. And he's a really, really talented player. I think the feeling has always been that he just isn't quite quick enough and isn't quite sharp enough for the Premier League. But I think he's got a real chance of having a really good career in the Championship and maybe being somebody like a Tom Kearney at Fulham, who's a really good Championship player and maybe can make the step up later on in his career to be a Premier League player. But for what Tottenham need now, I don't think he's good enough, and he's going to get the chance. The real frustration for him is that it probably would have been great for him if he'd stuck around, maybe this season actually, in hindsight, and just been part of that squad, because he's a technically very good player. And when Spurs obviously were without Maddison, and then Kulusevski's injuries rumbled on, and then Xavi had difficulties, and you're using Lucas as a number 10. If Jamie had been in those training sessions, and I know there's coaches at Spurs like Matty Wells and Stuart Lewis that really would have been big for Jamie and would have been pushing his cause. If he had got an opportunity, maybe with the better players around him, he would have looked better. But I think there is that feeling that he's just not quite quick enough to do it in the Premier League. Very good in the league, very good in League One. I think he will be a very good Championship player, but not quite good enough to be a Premier League player just yet.
Okay, Dan, thanks for your question. Now, just finishing off with the youngsters. I mean, everyone's got different opinions. That's the beauty of football. It can be the frustration of it sometimes. Wild Man Mountain Jack 3725 says, Lancashire is a must in the squad this year. Mopeless84 says that Mikey Moore will be James Maddison's successor. And I almost sense, because we've had lots of other comments about Lancashire and Moore, and of course they're both very good players, but it seems to me that we've got lots of supporters who favour one over the other. And we've made the point, obviously, that there are so many young players in the squad. There's too many from that point of view. So, George, I'm putting you in charge of those 2 youngsters. And you always make the very good point as well, of course, that we need young players so we can start singing He's One of Our Own again, just to get that pride, and also to make the academy worthwhile and all the rest of it. If you can only have one of those players next season, who do you go for?
So I love Will Lancashire, and I think he's going to be a brilliant forward, and I hope it is for Tottenham, but I would have to pick Mikey Moore. Mikey Moore is just... And look, and people say this in the comments, and it's fair. I do sometimes get carried away with young players, but I'm not getting carried away with Mikey Moore. I know how talented he is, and I think everyone in England knows how talented he is. So it would be an absolute travesty if Spurs were to let him go. I don't think they will. Well, I think maybe with both of these guys, it might be a case that they both go on loan again, actually. And new loan, new contract is kind of the feeling, certainly with Will Lancashire. But I could see that happening with Mikey Moore potentially if the minutes aren't going to be there. Just to sort of go a little bit off topic, but kind of on topic, I was told that Johan Lange is actually the one that's speaking to a lot of these players and being honest and upfront with them. To be fair to Johan, and saying, the club are going in this direction, the manager's going this direction. We appreciate you're too good not be getting minutes at your age and at your talent, with your talent. So if a loan is best, or if a fail to move is best, we'll try and facilitate that. So I think that's, in a lot, you'd be surprised, but in football, a lot of the time it's just Chinese whispers and hearsay, and no one takes any accountability. So it's good that Johan is doing that, and it's good that it's also happening early, because a lot of the time, I think there was a scenario with Will Lange a couple of seasons ago where he sort of thought he was going to go on loan, and then all of a sudden he was told at the last minute that he couldn't go on loan. Or sorry, no, it was the other way around. He wasn't going on loan when everyone wanted to sign him. And then at the last minute, he was told he could go on loan, but the clubs that wanted him had now got players for him, so he ended up staying. But it was a bit of a mess, to be totally honest. And at least a lot of those young players have got clarity. And it's as I said before, I think Spurs are, after back-to-back 17th place finishes, they realise they have to spend the money, and the message this summer is spend, and get players for now. And unfortunately, these young guys, aside from one or two, are going to miss out. I just really hope that we don't sell Mikey Moore, and I still have faith that we won't. I hope Newcastle don't come in for him with this Tonali deal, because I could see them trying that rather than Solanke. But I think Spurs and everyone in world football knows how talented Mikey Moore is. They know what an unbelievable character he is, going through what he did at Rangers. He didn't get a look in for 3 months. He did get a look in, sorry, but he was playing in a terrible system, and fans were completely on his back, and he got through that. He didn't sulk, didn't decide to return back to London. He stayed in Glasgow and made a real name for himself. So I think he will go out on loan again, and then maybe next season there'll be more of a pathway if Spurs have moved an Odegaard, and maybe Maddison then is another year down the line, and there's a bit more room for Mikey Moore to get his chance, and he'll be a bit older and a bit more mature then. I'd like to say the same for Will, but I think there's that feeling that he could go on loan again and get a new contract, or if a significant fee comes in, he'll get a move. I think it sounds like he would love to be a success at Spurs. Maybe that's different to Luka Vuskovic right now, but I think Will certainly would love to be a success. It's just whether he gets the opportunity.
Yeah, so maybe one more year on loan for both, and then if Spurs make real progress this coming season, we're back in Europe, there are more fixtures, more opportunities and all the rest of it, because they are clearly two great talents. Actually, why don't we send Johan Lange on loan, so he could really sort of improve his work ethic and all the rest of it. I'm not going to keep hammering, but I just find it amazing that within a month of the end of the season, all the vitriol, people we forget, and the club are protecting themselves and all the rest of it. Okay, it's a fresh start, but it's funny. Some people just survive, don't they? Now, John H on Spotify. Why has Tottenham abandoned North America? All marketing and international friendlies seem to be geared to Asia and the Pacific.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. So thank you for this. I don't have an official answer, but I think my sort of knowledge of the situation and kind of intel would be that I think essentially Spurs had Son Heung-min, who is, an Asian superstar, one of the biggest names in the world, literally as big as David Beckham in Asia. So I think when you've got a superstar like that, it makes sense. And obviously there would have been a lot of money being offered from, countries in Asia and the Pacific to bring Sonny over. And then more recently, you then appoint an Australian manager in Ange, and it makes sense to kind of make the most of him whilst you've got him. Management's is very short term now, isn't it? So it was only 2 years, but whilst you've got an Australian figure, if you can go over to Australia and play games over there, you're going to get paid handsomely to do it. I do think that with Sonny moved on and with obviously Ange moved on as well, it wouldn't surprise me if Spurs kind of go back towards the North America market over the next couple of summers when it comes to pre-season games. And there has been some big pre-season sort of friendly tournaments in America, which I certainly think Spurs would probably like to be involved in. It would have been under Pochettino, I think, the last time Spurs were in America. I remember Harry Kane scored an amazing goal against Juventus from the halfway line. But it's someone like Vinai And I guess also, some members of the Lewis family are based over there. Nick Boucher is based in America, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's more of a focus now over the next couple of years to try and build up the American audience even more, because obviously they've built it up a decent amount, but it makes sense to go over there and not to go Asia so often now that Sonny's no longer part of the club.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last one comes from Lou Lutri on YouTube, who says, we all know that George is obsessed with Ange Postecoglou. So does he wish that he was a woman so that he could send Ange love letters? Maybe you already have. I don't know.
I thought I'd leave that in for the lulz. I actually tried not to mention Ange in this one until that bit, but I couldn't help myself. I've had to mention him, but no, I do not wish I was a woman. But I did spend Father's Day with my little boy, obviously, but watching videos of the Europa League win. So and then the parade. So I got my Ange fix on Father's Day. So there you go.
Well, I think George's dream holiday trip would be to travel with Ange and his favourite player, Richarlison, for 10 days. And they could sort of look at all the videos and remember Richarlison's decent performances. But look, we've parked all that now, that whole business with Ange. And the more we go forward and the longer ago it is now, of course, and I was never an Ange disciple, but we'll never forget that fantastic night in Bilbao. I think he's a very good pundit. He talks a very good game. We know that. I mean, you guys as in the media, he would always give you something, certainly beforehand. I used to, and the more I see George, by the way, how good he is as a pundit on television, the more frustrated I am at the way he did behave after games. When he was staring down at the ground and just not, I think, giving a good account of himself or the club. I still don't quite understand why he was like that. And people were saying, oh, well, maybe he's shy. He's not. Look at him on television. He's a natural. I don't get why he had that negative persona to such a degree while he was our manager.
Yeah, I think part of it is the way he was after games is just so emotional. And the managers aren't they? Jurgen Klopp is brilliant pre-match. Liverpool lose 2-1 to Spurs and they've had two men sent off, and he is absolutely terrible because he's absolutely fuming. I think there is a bit with Ange where he's almost like half introvert, half extrovert. Get him in front of a team, get him in front of a crowd talking about football when he's just talking generally about football, and he owns the field. But then obviously in these press conferences he's getting difficult questions, and we know now, being further away from the past, that obviously we're asking him certain questions that he probably knew he couldn't answer. Harry Kane, do you want to keep hold of Harry Kane? Yeah, of course I do. When he knows he's already been told that Harry Kane's going, so it's kind of I sort of have some sympathy from that aspect. But yeah, I do still think after how bad last year was, it would have been great to have seen season 3, because it couldn't have been any worse than last year, could it?
That's true. And I slightly, with the benefit of hindsight, must admit, I compromised myself to a degree in trying to fully back Thomas Frank because, and I will not change my opinion of Ange. Look, it was an amazing roller coaster ride, but what happened in the league was unacceptable, and there was a knock-on effect last year. I sincerely believed that Thomas Frank was going to make a big difference, and he didn't. It was a mistake, and we move forward now, and we look to be in a great position. So, absolutely no grudges. Ange is part of our history, as by the way, of course, is the general. And I think we should say a slightly belated happy birthday to Keith Birkinshaw, who was 91 yesterday. George, makes me feel old because I mean those were the glory days for me, but I'm delighted he still looks fit. He's and the love he receives from the likes of Ozzy Ardiles and all of his, well, not all of them, because Steve Archibald, my absolute hero, did fall out with Birkinshaw, but all the birthday messages yesterday to the general and those glory days of the 80s. As with Ange, those glory days of the early 80s are never going to, well, you weren't around then, but you've read about it. They're never going to be forgotten either, are they?
Yeah, I've loved reading about all that. And I did, when we left the lane, I did a couple of big interviews with people from 70s and 80s, and yeah, they was all absolutely brilliant on Keith Birkinshaw. And yeah, 91, what a guy. It'd be
Yeah,
great if, I mean, I think he was actually at a game recently, wasn't he? Maybe he was at the
he
last
was.
final game of the season. But it was good to see him at Spurs lately. And look, hopefully, we've found our new general in De Zerbi, and the glory days can return. So
Well, I
fingers
hope. I
crossed, we'll
hope.
have more trophies to
Actually,
celebrate.
there was a picture I saw yesterday of Birkinshaw at his desk with the UEFA trophy. So he was about to leave because, of course, that was his last game in charge. And I know he famously said along the lines of there used to be a football club over there, and he walked away. And to be fair, the next couple of years at Spurs were fantastic. We should have won the league a year later. But I'd like to sit down with Keith Birkinshaw now and actually ask him, does he regret leaving in the way he did in '84? Because he had 6 amazing years. The club went down, he got them back up. We were fantastic between 1980 and 1984. So I hope somebody, maybe actually George, this could be a suggestion for you while he's still around and obviously still remembers it all. I've never really heard what he's had to say about deciding to leave in the manner he did in '84, and I would love to know about that. I'll just very quickly. I mean, I'm just looking on social media, and there is a report again. I don't know whether this is accurate at all, suggesting that Dejan Kulusevski could be ready to return to action within 6 to 8 weeks. Have you had any sort of recent updates as far as he's concerned?
No recent updates on Decky, other than his Instagram page putting a few things on there, which all seems fairly positive. I mean, if he is in a position where I think Spurs return to pre-season, I think July the 10th, the Friday, players will start filtering back in for pre-season testing, and then I think it's the following Monday the 13th, when it's the official first day when De Zerbi will put them through their paces. So what will be about 3 weeks from them. I mean, if there's any way that he could be available for them, that would be fantastic. That's what he
Yeah.
needs, a full pre-season to get under his belt, and what an option he'll be. What a new signing he'll be,
Oh
genuinely.
yes. Yeah.
If he is fit.
And
But,
Madison as well. I mean, I was having a big row with my mate who's a massive Liverpool fan. I've had, well, I've said to him, very small wager, because I know some people don't respect or appreciate that sort of thing. But I said I am convinced Spurs will finish top 5 next season, and I pointed out Kulusevski and Madison, and he goes, "Oh, but these players wouldn't get into the Liverpool team." I said, "Well, look." Liverpool, there's a lot of these big teams that, I mean, Andoni Iraola's a great manager, but there's got to be a question mark over how he's going to get on there. Manchester City are coming to terms with life post Pep. Arsenal, I think, unfortunately, going to be very good. Chelsea, who knows? Possibly, possibly not. Newcastle, and I think the fact that we haven't got Europe, disappointing in some ways, but a massive bonus in terms of how our league form should pan out. I genuinely believe if we continue to do the business we've already done in the summer, George, and these injured players come back, I really think under De Zerbi, we've got a great chance to finish in the top 5, haven't we?
future could be very bright, but we've got to get these signings first. That's the only thing I'd say. I'm excited about life under De Zerbi. Certainly this next season, we'll see in how long it lasts, this roller coaster ride. But I think if he can get the signings he wants this summer, Tonali, really good left forward, another passer in midfield, then yeah, it is exciting to see what we can do. And then if Dan Lewin, doing the performance director, can come in and get us, a pretty competent outfit when it comes to injuries again, that would make a big difference. I certainly think there is a potential for Spurs to be top 5 if everything goes for them, which doesn't normally. But one game a week, the other teams being in Europe, spending big now, new sort of era, is they've got a real chance to get back up that league and then stay there. That's the key.
Exactly. That's why June and July are my favourite times of the year because, as I said last week, anything is possible. George, thank you very much. Do check out George's report today in The Independent for more details about that fan advisory board meeting and everything that came out of that, which is very interesting. And impress all your mates by saying you can name the 4 men now who've played 200 plus senior internationals. That's Luka Modric, Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, and Badr Al-Mutawa. Maybe we should go after him. the Kuwaiti international. He's played 200 games for his country. We probably can't. Well, Modric, no. Ronaldo, unlikely. Messi, probably not. But Al Mutawa could be available. I'm Marcus Buckland. We will hear from the two Toms eventually, but for now, thanks for all your questions, all your observations. Keep them coming, and come on, you Spurs.